America's Navy was born not in shipyards, but in fishing towns. Schooners turned raiders, crews of Marblehead seamen, and orders written in desperation. By October 1775, Washington's fleet was barely more than a handful of hastily chartered schooners. The question was no longer if America had a navy, but whether it could survive its first real fight. It's October 10th, 1775. General Washington's orders to Captain Nicholas Broughton were, "You are carefully to avoid coming to action with any ships of war. You are to proceed on a cruise against such vessels as may be found on the coast of America, bound inward and outward to or from Boston." The mission was part of Washington's desperate strategy to strangle Boston's supply line. The Redcoats were trapped by land but fed by sea. Intercepting transports meant fewer rations, less powder, and greater pressure on the garrison. But a ship of war? That was off limits. A schooner like Hannah, a converted fishing vessel with a handful of light guns, stood no chance against a Royal Navy sloop mounting 16 to 18 cannon. Yet on October 10th, that is exactly what appeared on the horizon. HMS Nautilus, patrolling Massachusetts Bay, spotted Hannah and moved to intercept. Eyewitnesses later recalled how quickly the predator closed in. The British commander believed the chase would be routine, a swift capture of a rebel nuisance. Broughton had minutes to decide. His main options weren't good: fight and be destroyed, flee and risk capture in open water. So he chose a third option: trickery. Steering toward Beverly Cove, he ran his schooner deliberately into the shallow water, betting that the heavier sloop would not dare follow. It worked, well, partially. Hannah grounded safely out of reach, but Nautilus anchored offshore and opened fire. For 2 to 3 hours, according to reports preserved in naval documents of the American Revolution, the British sloop kept up a brisk fire. Cannon shot threatened to splinter the stranded schooner. Crewmen scrambled for cover. One wrong hit might have ended her. The British knew this ship could not fight back, but what they didn't expect was that the shoreline would. When the alarm spread that a British warship was attacking, the townsfolk rushed to the waterfront. An eyewitness later claimed, "The inhabitants fired briskly upon the man-of-war from every eminence. Men hauled old cannon down from warehouses. Militia companies dragged light artillery to the shore. From behind stone fences and sandbanks, muskets cracked. From wharves, cannon roared." One newspaper reported that for 2 hours, the gunners of Beverly and Salem poured incessant fire upon the enemy. By evening, the tide rose high enough to lift the battered Nautilus. Her captain cut anchor and limped away into deeper waters, annoyed and outgunned from the shore. The Royal Navy, the unchallenged ruler of the seas, had just been humbled by farmers, fishermen, and shopkeepers. American casualties? Not a one reported. The verdict from locals was clear. The first clash between British naval power and Washington's improvised fleet had ended in humiliation for the crown. Hannah survived. Well, the grounding pretty much ended her service, but soon after she was returned to her owner. Washington, practical as ever, reassigned Broughton and his crew to the schooner Hancock. Ships could be replaced. Experienced sailors could not. The lesson of Beverly Cove was clear. America could not yet fight the Royal Navy directly, but with knowledge of local waters and the support of determined communities, survival and even victory was possible. The Beverly affair did not cool Washington's appetite for naval disruption. On October 16th, just days after the battle, he issued new sealed orders. Captains Broughton, now of the Hancock, and John Selman of the Franklin were sent north toward Nova Scotia and the St. Lawrence River. The intelligence was enticing. 2 British brigs had sailed from England with no force. They were carrying 6,000 muskets, powder, and ordnance bound for Quebec. Washington, however, was working from outdated reports. The ships had already reached Canada. Still, he wrote, "You are to proceed with all possible dispatch for the St. Lawrence River, in order, if possible, to intercept 2 brigantines laden with 6,000 stand of arms, a large quantity of powder, and other stores." He reminded them to treat Canadian civilians kindly and to avoid any unnecessary conflict. But he also sweetened the deal. Prize money would be shared, 1/3 to the captors, the rest to the Continental cause. It was an ambitious mission, one that revealed just how far Washington was willing to push this tiny navy. Broughton and Selman sailed north in late October, stopping at Canso. There they seized several small vessels, including the sloop Phoebe on October 31st. They even scouted the gut of Canso, a narrow channel perfect for ambush. But their main quarry was long gone. The brigs carrying muskets had already slipped upriver unscathed. The mission, in its official purpose, had failed. But then there was a shift. Things moved from strategy to scandal. Fired up and not wanting to return empty-handed, the captains set their sights on St. John's Island. Today, that's Prince Edward Island. Rumors suggested the colony's officials were recruiting for the British, so on November 17th and 18th, their men landed at Charlottetown. They seized the acting governor, Phillips Callbeck, Surveyor General Thomas Wright, and other prominent figures. They even carried off the colony's official seal and Governor Patterson's commission. For the Marblehead sailors, it was a bold improvisation. For Washington, that was a breach of orders, and a dangerous one. When the prisoners were marched into Cambridge in December, Washington found himself in an awkward position. These were not military officers, they were civilian administrators. Holding them risked alienating the neutral Canadians and fueling British propaganda. On December 7th, Washington wrote bluntly to Congress, "My fears respecting Captain Broughton and Selman's expedition to St. John's were too well founded. They have brought off 3 of the principal inhabitants, together with the governor's commission and the province seal. As these men were only acting in their civil capacities, I have released them." Washington valued boldness, but he demanded discipline. This raid had crossed the line. The prisoners were freed, the captains were reprimanded. The northern crews, together with Beverly Cove, etched 3 lessons into the DNA of America's infant navy. Reach. Even small schooners could sail hundreds of miles and disrupt Britain's supply lines. Restraint. Captains who exceeded orders could endanger the cause. And reliability. Washington needed officers he could trust to obey, not just to dare. As one Continental officer observed later, "We could afford no rogues, however gallant." By late November, another Marblehead captain, John Manley, in the schooner Lee, prowled the waters off Cape Ann, and his venture was the prize Washington had dreamed of. I'll share that story in part 3 of The Birth of the Navy. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to subscribe below so you'll be notified when the next portion of this story comes out.